This particular law of sowing and reaping is a superior law. It is the highest law of giving and receiving in the earth. It's what Jesus taught. As a matter of fact, Jesus said in Luke 6:38, he said, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give unto your bosom." And this law of sowing and reaping, we find just about in every area of creation and every area of life. Nothing can exist unless something is given and something is receiving. Let me start with talking on this about sowing and reaping. Go with me to 2 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. Okay. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 6. It says, "But I say unto you, he which soweth sparingly shall also reap sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall also reap bountifully." Now, I want to talk about sowing and reaping in the context of tithes and offerings, in the context of tithing. You know, let me say this and let me say it clearly. I do not oppose tithing. I am not against tithing. I do believe that it should be taught in its proper context. Both. I don't think we should say tithing should be done away with. It's the Old Testament. No. Stop. On the other hand, we should not say that tithing will produce miracles and healing, and you don't have to train your children. If you tithe, your children will fear the Lord, and all this other stuff on the other end, that if you just tithe, it'll solve all your problems. No, that's an extreme too. That's just as wrong as saying tithing is unbiblical. But what's the middle ground? Where's the balance? Here's the balance. Jesus said it in Luke, I just said. Luke 6:38. Jesus didn't say in Luke 6:38, "Tithe, and it shall be tithed back unto you." Why wouldn't he say that? He used the word give. As a matter of fact, let me give you some biblical statistics. The word tithe, me and my wife ran these references, and it's pretty interesting. The words tithe, tithes, and tithing, all three of them in combination, is only mentioned 40 times in the Bible. 40 times. Now, how many times is the word giving mentioned? Now, I didn't notice I said just giving. I didn't say the word giveth, give, or just giving. It's mentioned 1,200 times in the Bible, giving. Giving has 90 Hebrew synonyms. I said 90 Hebrew synonyms that mean the same. And it's the Hebrew word Natan, and it's from the Hebrew Strong's number is H5414. So study it yourself and you'll see that it has 90 Hebrew synonyms. There are 90 words that are used in substitution to the word give. That's amazing. Just go there and study that in the Hebrew and you'll see something quite interesting. Now, why is it the word giving is mentioned 1,200 times? Why? And only tithing is mentioned 40 times. One of the reasons why is because, watch this carefully, tithing, the word tithe means a tenth, 10%, right? Now, what are we told to do with 10%? 10% of our first fruit increase, or our income, what we receive, we are to give back to the Lord 10%, right? Giving, listen to this, is superior to just tithing. I want you to get that. I want many of you to digest. Giving is superior to tithing. Now I'm going to say this and I want you to hear it clearly, because I don't want no one to misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm going to say this emphatically. When you tithe, you are giving. Did you hear me? when you tithe, you are giving. But do you know you can be a tither and not a giver? I'm going to say it again. When you tithe, you are giving, but you can be a tither and not a giver. What's the difference? The question is, where is your heart? Now, I'm going to say this to many of you. What I'm sharing with you is going to open the door, the real door of blessings. I'm telling you, when you get this message, it'll change your life. The real door of blessing is what I'm sharing with you right now. We find in the church that we're taught to tithe, and I've been tithing for years, and I believe in tithing. But the Lord began to deal with me concerning just tithing, and I've seen this with others. I've had people say to me, I've been tithing for years, and it ain't working, and I'm not prospering, and my lights are being shut off, and I'm struggling financially, and they've been tithing for years. How many of you right now, you're listening to me, and you're a faithful tithe, you still tithe faithfully to this day, right now while I'm talking to you? And yet you're still struggling. Many of you, your life has gotten worse. And you're wondering what's wrong. I believe what I'm going to teach you in this message is what's wrong. One, hey, it may not be your fault. You may have been taught wrong. You may have been taught that your sole responsibility financially is to tithe. Well, I want to let you know that is not your sole and only responsibility. And that does not bring all the blessings of God. Now, what brings the blessings of God in your life? What Jesus said, give. Paul reiterated it, and we see it in the book of Acts. The book of Acts says they had no need. Let's go to Acts chapter 2. This is where revival started, right here in Acts chapter 2. Verse, now watch this. Verse 43. It says, and fear came upon every soul. It says, and many wonder signs and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together and had all things common. Now watch verse 45. And sold their possessions, and sold their possessions, and sold their possessions. It didn't say they tithe. It said they sold their possessions and goods. Now watch this. And it says, and parted them to all men as every man had need. This doesn't mention tithing in here. Why? Why doesn't it mention tithing? Now, what a mystery. But if you look down to verse 47, it says, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. Now, they sold their possessions and their goods. Now watch this. And did what? Parted them to every man as they had need. Why did they do this? I'll tell you why. It became a tradition in the church. I'm going to show you why. Go to Luke. It's revealed right here in Luke, the 12th chapter. They were practicing what you should be practicing, that Jesus taught. And it's in Luke, the 12th chapter, verse 33. And it says it here. It says, Jesus said this. He said, sell that you have and give alms. Provide yourselves bags which wax not old, a treasure in the heavens that faileth not, where no thief approacheth, neither moth corrupteth. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Now, there are two instances of what Jesus said here. This instance, he was not talking to the rich young ruler. Remember, in Luke 18:22, if you go to 18:22, you will see that he said the same thing to the rich young ruler. But in this context, he is not talking to the rich young ruler. So you can't say that Jesus is saying this because of where that man's heart was. He's talking to his disciples. But watch what he said here carefully. He said, sell that you have, right? And give alms. And give alms. He didn't say sell that you have and just tithe. Tithing is a good thing. You should tithe to your local church. Listen to me carefully. But above tithing, if you're going to obey what Jesus taught, you're going to have to do what he said, and that is give. What is giving? Giving is tithing. Tithing is giving. So I want to reaffirm something. For those who are against tithing and preach against tithing, you're in error. Tithing is giving. So every one of you who are tithing, continue tithing. Keep tithing. Listen to me. Keep on tithing. Don't stop tithing. Don't let nobody fool you, because you're giving. But on top of that, with that, if you believe that tithing is all you're supposed to do, then you are just as guilty as those who teach against tithing and those who don't tithe at all. Why? Because that's disobedience to Jesus Christ. Hear me. That's imbalance to the Word of God. And let me share with you what I'm talking about. Jesus said, sell that you have and give alms. Give alms to who? To the poor. To the poor. Now watch this. When you tithe to the local church, now listen to me carefully. There are millions of churches. There are two kinds of churches. Basically, let me give this distinction because I have to say this. Every church does not do alms or give to the poor. Some churches do it on a consistent basis, some don't. But we do know all these churches teach, encourage, preach tithing. Now, many of us have got the logic that, well, I give to my local church and my local church does the alms. Watch this. That's not a problem. But here's the problem. Your neighbor next door. If your neighbor knocked on your door next door and said, me and my children are hungry and we can't eat, what are you going to do? Are you going to send them to your local church and say, I tithe to my local church? So I tell you what, sister, call my pastor and go to my local church. They'll help you. Now, there are some people who you can do that because your local church, you have a food program, and many churches don't have that. Many churches, if you told your neighbor that and your neighbor went to your local church, they'll say, we can't help you. But you tied to that church. You hear what I'm saying? Now, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this very strong. And if you are a local church and you're receiving tithes and offerings, you should have a free benevolent program that feed the hungry and clothe and do outreaches of helping poor people. Did you hear me? At least a food program. Did you hear me? People in your church shouldn't have to go to the world or to another church and they're tithing in your local church and they can't get their needs met and they've been tithing there for years. Hear me. Now, but I want you to see this. This is the part I want you to see. He said, sell that you have and give alms. It is your responsibility to not think that you're only supposed to tithe to your local church. You're supposed to also take the responsibility of helping your neighbor. Hear what I'm saying? And saying, sister, I got some food for you, or let me take you shopping. Did you hear me? That's what it's talking about when he says sell that you have and give alms. Now, we're going to see this principle, this law, a superior law of giving and receiving. Go to Genesis, the 8th chapter, Genesis 8. Genesis 8, verse 22 says, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Notice he said seed time and harvest. Okay? There are three phases: seed, time, harvest. Now, the difference between seed and harvest is time. That's the factor of sowing a seed and getting your harvest. It's weight. It's timing. Did you hear me? Now, but he did say here, seed, harvest. Let me give an example when I talk about sowing and reaping versus tithing or giving and receiving. You know, if you want to produce a baby, right? The sperm is the seed. You agree? right? The baby is the harvest. You agree? You cannot operate the law of tithing, a law of tithing, to produce a baby. You can't do it. And I'll prove it to you. Okay? I'll prove it to you. They have proven that there are over more than 1 million sperm cells in a single ejaculation. Okay? It only takes one sperm cell to penetrate the egg in order to produce a baby. Bam! 1 out of 1 million. Sometimes 2 when you get twins, and through medical and sometimes you get triplets, and they can cause you to have 6. So 6 of them can produce. Watch this now. Let's just say we went according to the law of tithing, and we said 10% of the sperm that is ejaculated is going to be used to pierce the egg to make a baby. How many sperm would you get? 10% of 1 million. Y'all do the math. 10% of 1 million. I think that's 100,000. Come on, people. What woman in the world can carry 100,000 sperm? 100,000 babies. It'll kill her. It wouldn't even grow. It would be a monster. It just wouldn't make sense. 10%? Watch this. It only takes 1 of the million. But I'll tell you this one thing. The law of sowing and reaping is applied there. What happens? You can't produce a baby without there being a seed sown and a reaping. Somebody has to give and somebody has to receive. And it rotates. Now watch this. He gives the seed, she receives it in the egg, and she gives back a baby. The baby turns around, gets grown, and he gives a seed. The woman receives and she gives back another baby. The reason you were born is because there's giving, receiving, giving, receiving, giving, receiving. There's a tree in your backyard because a seed was sown, a harvest was produced. Your grandmother is your grandmother because your great-grandparents, somebody gave, somebody received. If you went by 10%, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. Now, let me give an example. Let me show you this scripture. Let me show you 2 Corinthians 9. We're going to get into this one. 2 Corinthians 9, right? Verse 10. Okay? We're going to come back to this. But I want to share this with you within this context. Verse 10 says, "Now he that ministered seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness." What this is basically saying is that God gives you seed to sow and bread to eat. Now watch this. He gives you seed to sow. Hear me. Seed. If you give a man 1 seed, couldn't he get 1 million seed from it? Is that right? If you gave him 1 seed, that's all he needs is 1 million. He can produce from that 1 seed. Why? He don't need 10%. All he needs is 1 seed. 10% of what? He has nothing. See, God gives 1 seed, and when you produce the 1 seed, God gave the 1 seed, you produce the 1 seed, and then from that 1 seed, you can produce 10%. So first, the law of sowing and reaping has to come into place before the law of giving a tithe. That's why you have to teach people to give and receive, to sow and to reap, to sell and buy.